So today we have Mert Corwin will precede me with some interesting ideas about underground ocean. I think we have to take the word ocean or water broadly, because as I understand it, we're talking about minerals with H2O as part of the mineral. And so there's not this vast quantities of water. Of course, there is that too, but I think you're going to focus on water that's bound up. But Mert, go ahead and tell us about us and show us some slides before we get going on the regular talk. I appreciate your contribution to today's theme.
Let's try this. So, did that come up for you all?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
All right. So, yeah, as Richard pointed out, this concept, you can see here. Let me get a little higher here. We'll get to who uncovered this. This started back in 2014 with some research projects going on at several places that were down here talking about at the National Synchrotron Light Source and the Department of Energy, Brookhaven. I got the Brookhaven. I don't know what that first National Synchrotron Light Source. Everybody familiar with that thing? I have no idea what that is.
But it's right there in Brookhaven.
Oh, that's in
Okay,
Brookhaven.
can I just comment? There's
Go for it, Lou.
There are a bunch of Argonne has one, Brookhaven. There's a couple other labs that have those, and they create powerful X-rays that do all kinds of great research. All right, that's all I'm going to say.
Okay. Well, that helps put some validity on this whole concept. And as Richard pointed out, the water is bound up in rocks. We'll talk about that a little bit here. This is kind of just brief, just a couple of quick little slides here. So if you look at the Earth, that come up okay?
Yes, lovely.
The piece they're talking, where they're saying this exists, is in this about 400 miles deep, 600 millimeters between the upper and lower in this transition zone, they call it. So it's a little ways in, but not real far. And this is kind of where that research, for the people doing some of that research, in addition to the Brookhaven group. And you can see it was the University of Mexico, some seismologists, and they're looking at what's going on inside. I'm not sure well, I do know what started this. There were some minerals found that clearly were created under extreme pressures, extreme temperatures, kind of special kind of diamonds. And they discovered they had great water content. How strange is that? So they're looking at this, and it's interesting. We talk about where did Earth's water come from, and there's sort of one theory is that some icy comets hit the planet and threw a lot of water on us. But and they say seeping out of the center of the Earth, if a hard comet hits the Earth and fractures the crust, these waters are then released because they're no longer under pressure, and they come bubbling out of their minerals that they're captured in. So they're only captured in the minerals when they're at very high pressure. And if you release that pressure by cracking the crust, which happens in volcanoes, and some of the tectonic plate shifts release some of this water. I think there's an interesting scenario that might look like a hard comet hits the Earth, cracks into that transition zone, and we flood the Earth. Welcome to Noah's flood. I mean, there's some interesting opportunities if you look at some of this water hidden in the Earth's mantle. And then you think about, they try to calculate how much water is down there. And that's an interesting statement there. 3 times the volume of the entire collection of oceans on the surface of the planet. Needless to say, if you triple the amount of water in our oceans, there might not be much land left. Maybe we'd have water in the what's that national park out west that was underwater. Anyway, it doesn't really matter.
Yellowstone? Are you talking about Yellowstone?
No, I'm talking about the one north of there that is kind of, it looks like a dried up ocean.
Glacier? Glacier
Yeah,
National Park.
And I'm thinking of the dead.
You're thinking of California, I think.
Maybe I'm not, but maybe. But anyway, we talk about, how could water have gotten to some of these places? And you add that, some piece of that water to the surface, and strange things happen. This happens to be a picture of what the particular one of the many minerals, the one that seems to be the one that they're speculating is the most prevalent down there. There's a lot more digging, a lot more holes to be drilled, be put in before that's going to be solid science. Right now, it's really speculative, and it started in 14. We're now what, almost 10 years later, still doing a lot of stuff on that. So if you probably noticed that we are being live streamed on on YouTube. If you go to, where are we here? Where's my YouTube? Is that my YouTube? There it is. There it is. So there are many of these. You go to YouTube and you put in, see up at the top there where I put in deep water under the crust. You put that into YouTube and dozens of these things will show up. But my guess is you can't hear that, right? Anybody hear that?
No, but we can see it move.
All right, let me shut my sound off so I can talk to you. There you go. So, so here they're talking about there's a picture of these different crusts and how far in they are and what's in them. Needless to say, we've got a lot to learn about what's on the inside of our Earth.
Mert, you've got the sound turned off.
That's because
that's intentional.
Yeah, that's so I don't hear it. Apparently, I'm the only. The sharing sound didn't work, and that's okay. That's okay, because most of this we've already kind of glanced upon, and you can look at this. We don't need to watch this for 6 minutes. But if you have a volcano, apparently, I did not realize that apparently a lot of what comes out of volcanoes is water.
Yep.
So Richard says, yeah. And that's because the volcanoes, many of them, start down at that crust level. At that transition zone, and release some of this this entrapped water, because once you release the pressure, not only do you get all this lava coming out, but you also get water. I didn't realize that. I think of it all just being a bunch of hot steam and stuff. And this is some of the seismic activity they tested. You take this little blue stone, and then when you release the pressure, it turns into these other things, and then slowly turns into water. I don't think there's anything particularly interesting or necessary in the rest of this. Oh yeah, they talked about the conductivity of it. I don't know where that fits into the puzzle, what the advantage or purpose of measuring the conductivity, but they talk about all that kind of stuff. All right. I think that's enough on all of that for today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your introducing to that. I know when most of us took geology way back in the day, we would see a certain number of H2O atoms within or molecules, I guess I should say, links in with the minerals. But our professors never told us where it came from. And so we just took it and studied it for our exams. Since then, though, I've been fascinated with the interior of the Earth because of the potassium-40, the thorium, and the uranium that keeps the center of the Earth molten. And that gives us, along with the iron, molten iron gives us circulating magnetic fields that protect us from the solar wind. And that doesn't exist, I don't think, in any other planets that is known in our solar system. So anybody who plans a long-range visit to and on Mars is going to have to deal with this issue.
Maybe we're gonna have to punch some holes in those planets and get to their submerged water. We need a couple of comets to blast into these planets. So just, I'm going to shut up here in a minute. So Richard, you mentioned this coming up. Is any of the thing that comes out of these volcanoes? I didn't realize water come out. Is any of that radioactive?
Not that I'm aware of. The radioactivity, I think, stays deeper into the very central core, and I think what we're getting is hot magma, but not core material. But it's a question. I'm not sure how carefully we've looked.
Yeah. I have a question. What happens if the water keeps building up? Is there any evidence that the oceans have increased in volume over the millennia or whatever time period?
Well,
I'm not aware of it. It's mostly built into the minerals. And
well, they say that some of the tectonic shifts,
yes,
you know, the plate shifts, which obviously take quite a bit of time,
yes.
are one of the sources of the shifting of the surface water. It might not just have been comets putting water across the United States. It could be the shifting of the plates that then created this water.
Yeah. Well, I think of it as pretty bound up water. But it's interesting that it is in volcanic material. And
yeah, they say it's bound up with pressure, though. You need, I don't know, humongous atmospheres of pressure holding this together. And as soon as you release
a question.
Yes, please do. Yes, Don.
Where's the water come from?
Well,
whether it comes from how does it get into the earth to begin with?
Well,
at the destruction of the earth, or where? Where does it come from?
I don't think
Why
we
is
know.
it made?
where did Earth come from?
You could ask.
We're only 6,000 years old. How tricky can it be?
You could ask, where does uranium come from, or thorium? Those are not from the sun, for sure. Anything heavier than carbon didn't come from the sun, and so it's all exposed stars, exposed supernova.
I mean, it could. You said comets bring some of it into minerals, and there could be asteroids that hit the Earth. There could be all kinds of things that brought the water in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that what's interesting about it is water has an oxygen atom in the molecule, and I don't think there was that much oxygen around on the Earth when it was formed, and it took the plants and the bacteria to make enough oxygen for oxidative metabolism to start taking place and for things to come up out of the ocean onto land. So the amount of water must have been perhaps more limited at the Earth's formation, because there certainly wasn't an awful lot around for quite a long time on land available. So it's all very speculative and fun ideas to pursue. Well, let me share my talk this morning, my slides, I mean. So happy Earth Day, everybody. This is our last class of the spring, and I'll be talking my last slide about where to go for the summer and in the fall, and looking ahead to this continuing this fall. It's a picture here, a happy picture of underwater coral reefs, it's not all happy in reality, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. Notice the diver here, in contrast to the first slide, who's wearing an aqualung. More and more popular is this example of free diving. And a new paper out of the Scripps Institute of Oceanography proposes tapping into the global diving community to advance marine conservation and help achieve a sustainable goal, number 14, which is life below water. And I looked up that goal, and it's a little vague, but it does talk about using the oceans sustainably. And my hope is that we would forego the idea of mining the oceans, deep mining of magnesium nodules and things like that in the Pacific Ocean, and we would realize, and I'm going to have some slides of things in the deep Pacific later, to give us motivation to not get too wrapped up with these manganese or magnesium, I think they're both maybe, nodules, and to treasure some of the rare life forms that are on the bottoms of the ocean, so that we can take advantage of the enthusiasm of divers. You saw some of it when we talked about the movie The Octopus My Teacher. Those were free divers too, off South Africa. And by popularizing that idea, we can perhaps have more support by the public in the oceans as not being just a waste location.
What's the blue economy, Richard?
This is a term where we try and put some dollars and cents into the oceans. They have tremendous value. For example, this is a little bit of an offshoot, but in this morning's email, they were talking about all the CO2 that we have to remove at seaports from the vessels that come in, because these vessels are all of our shipping comes into these major ports on the east and west coast, particularly Los Angeles. And so they're building these CO2 removal units. And it made me realize how they're talking about hundreds of tons of CO2 that they're removing a day, but that's going to have to become millions of tons, not just hundreds of tons, but hundreds of millions of tons, in order for us to really make a meaningful impact. And how much easier that would be if we had not said, well, we'll let the military power their aircraft carriers and their submarines with nuclear power, but we won't bother asking anybody else. So if we feel like having something repainted, we'll just ship it off to China because it doesn't cost very much. And China will paint it for less than we could and ship it back. And so we continue to deal with trying to remove, through the so-called blue economy, CO2 from polluted seaports and elsewhere. It's not just the blue economy, is much broader than that, but I'm using that to pull the story in, when we could have long ago been insisting that all ocean traffic of over a certain size be nuclear powered. There's no reason why it can't be, and it would cost in the long run a lot less than, it's simply not feasible, in my opinion, to build enough CO2 removal machines at all seaports to account for the vast amounts of CO2 that are released by our shipping at the present time. This is a picture of some sperm whales, and people are just starting to realize that these sperm whales collect their maternal societies, and these female sperm whales get into some interesting conversations, and people are just starting to think that they're understanding how they pull us off. I'll have some pictures, I think, later describe the dramatic vocal cords that whales have, and large sacs, so that they can control very subtly the comments, what we interpret as grunts, And some free divers are beginning to think that they can understand some of the grunts and what they mean, like move out of the way, stupid, and things like that. But they're actually thinking that they can understand some of these communications from female sperm whales that stand on their heads, or sorry, not stand on their tails and remain vertical. And you can see on the left here an example of a free diver approaching. These whales could easily kill these divers if they wish to, but they seem to tolerate us if we behave properly with them. And so it's interesting. Some people have even proposed that whales be given personhood, since they have giant brains and seem to be far more intelligent than we had thought, and that we begin to really appreciate them as fellow intelligent species on the planet. That's a little bit of way out stuff, but interesting nonetheless. It's getting a little bit back to reality and bringing us to a new study of Nature has revealed that 3/4 of all industrial fishing vessels have been left out of previous tallies of human activity at sea. You can see on this atlas global image here of vessels that were publicly tracked within so many square kilometers over a 5-year period from 2017 to 2021. And when it gets redder, they've been left out of the tallies. We have these instruments that all ships are supposed to use, just like all airplanes use. And it's easy to monitor those in the airplanes, but harder to monitor ships. And we can see that around Europe, most of them are tracked between 3/4 and all of them on this area. If you can see the pointer here around Iceland and the Northern Europe. But as you get, and there's some down in Argentina, and a little bit in China. But what they're beginning to find now is that they're looking also at stationary ocean-based infrastructure, and they found a 9-fold increase in wind turbines off of China just in the last 4 years. So we're learning things by remote devices that allow us to look not only at ghost fishing, but other amazing things that are happening that we didn't really realize before. There's also been talk about underwater oil wells. We have an awful lot of them that have been abandoned, and people have been talking about removing them. And other people say, you know, it might not be such a great idea, because these abandoned oil wells, as long as they're not close enough to the surface to interfere with shipping and are not liable to leak, and that's a big liable, they do attract fish. I don't think there's any of these structures contain oil. I think these are all supportive steel structures, but notice that they're all encrusted with barnacles and various other tidbits that the fish like to nibble on, and it's become quite attractive and provides, in some respects, an area that might not support fish at all, and could contribute in some way to their niche for survival and having good feeding grounds offshore. What I thought I would do is bring you up to date a little bit on 6 methods to amplify and accelerate natural oceanic carbon removal. I'll show you a picture of a fellow who didn't show up for a review of his paper on climate restoration. He wrote a book about it, and we had it for I think summer reading last summer. And fortunately, I had some slides available, and we were able to talk about it, even though he forgot that it was Yom Kippur and never showed up to give us his talk. Turns out he gave a talk recently, or promoted a talk, and I'll come to that in a few minutes, by his collaborators who are working on some of the sea projects. But I just want to wish you could read these slides better, but focus on these little triangles. The little triangles that you see here, we'll take the one at the top in the center, electrifying seas. Carbon dioxide is directly removed from seawater by passing it electric current. And you can see it looks like two people sitting by the ocean, but these are electric currents that are removing the carbon dioxide. And I'll have much more detail on this a few slides from now. But what I thought is interesting is they have listed the potential capacity of these as high, but also the potential cost is high. So that sort of cancels out some of the enthusiasm. Even though the capacity is there, the cost would be high. If we took and contrast down in the lower left, restoring ecosystems, the trajectory of marine ecosystems promotes the movement of carbon from the surface to the seafloor through various currents and marine food chains, and many of the sediments to the bottom as the whales and kelp and all of the things in the ocean die. So this is the potential for this is low because it's happening all the time. It's nature, but it's not happening. It's being overwhelmed by the CO2 that we put in the atmosphere and that is picked up by the oceans. So its feasibility, even though its cost is low, its potential capacity remains. I don't mean absolutely low, but low for the amount that we're putting in. And you have all these other things which I'll elaborate on in a few minutes. But there are various ways to accelerate oceanic carbon removal. Before we get to that in detail, you might recall that in the article that we discussed last fall, iron fertilization was discussed and mentioned at the Queen Charlotte Islands. I'd forgotten that their name originally was Haida Gwaii, and this happened about 12 years ago. That they intended to raise nutrient levels offshore to improve the salmon population. And Jim Caldwell is listening in, and sometime, Jim, if you would let me know personally or unmute yourself, feel free to tell us what happened here. I'm getting two different stories. One story is that no clear cause and effect on local salmon happened, and so it was just sort of abandoned, but there was quite a lot of public outcry. Not so much from the local residents, I think, as from organizations like the World Wildlife Fund, for one, probably Sierra Club, I'm not sure about them, but people did not like the fact that they were even looking into this, which I think is a bit short-sighted. We do need to understand more, in my opinion, about iron fertilization and whether it's beneficial for some fisheries and what possible side effects. We'll only find out if we do some careful testing. Now let's do a little background math to make all of this relevant. The carbon in our air is 1 trillion tons as CO2. But the carbon in our land is quite a bit more than that, 3.5 trillion tons of decayed bodies, plants, and animals. And the carbon in our oceans is 40 trillion tons. And 90% of that is carbonate and bicarb ions. So this is something worth remembering, that the oceans are going to be very important if we want to try and remediate some of the CO2 that's around in our atmosphere. This trove of oceanic carbon has been increasing, and this is the important sentence here, saving us from climate change. We've been very fortunate to have 70% of the surface as ocean, and that has been picking up at a 40-to-1 ratio. 90% of it is carbonate and bicarb ions, and it's been slowing down over the past industrial couple of hundred years. It's soaked up about 30% of our carbon emissions. Alkaline materials like limestone dissolved by rainwater and washed out to sea. some scientists and, of course, entrepreneurs want to speed up nature by making more carbonate and more dollars as well. Examples of these, and you may have heard of some of these companies: Planetary Technologies, Vesta, Calcarea, Aquatic, and there are many others, all getting into the act. So coming back to what I promised to tell you was alkaline delivery by ship-based or based on the erosion of alkaline rocks. And you remember I showed you the ocean side here where there's an intake and an output. I'll show you in a few minutes the details of this. It's far more complicated than you think and uses far more energy than you might think. This is a pretty simple way. We've talked about this a couple of times, just using olivine on the beaches. And another name for olivine is brucite. And we'll talk about that. They've been experimenting with that up in, I think it's in Cape Cod, if I recall correctly. And here you can deliver alkalinity from ship-based. In the pink color is for visualization purposes. Most of this is magnesium hydroxide. It's quite alkaline. It's almost like milk of magnesia. So we're putting in laxative. If you recall, some of you as children taking milk of magnesia to move things along. That's basically what this alkaline material is. And it has an effect of dissolving in water and promoting better pH. So here's an example of brucite or olivine used for raising the pH. This it can raise the pH of ocean water and trigger carbon dioxide capturing. So as the ocean becomes more and more acidic, it's a little harder for it to absorb CO2 from the air. So by making it more alkaline, not only do we prevent the formation of oysters and other wonderful cleansing organisms, but we put the ocean in a better pH for absorbing more CO2 out of the air. So it becomes like a sort of like a vacuum cleaner, and the ocean becomes the bag of air with the CO2 in it. And if you can imagine, we can use the ocean, as long as we're careful with how we use it, to control the pH for the purpose of the living organisms and allow it to continue to absorb CO2 from the air. It's a very powerful mechanism.
Hey, Richard, can I make a comment?
Yes, Doug.
So I think actually when you're adding this magnesium hydroxide, essentially what you're doing is reacting the magnesium with the carbonate ion in water, and you're forming magnesium carbonate and water.
Correct.
And essentially you're precipitating out the carbonate, which allows you to absorb more from the air.
That's correct. Thank you for that clarification, Doug. Yeah. Good point. Okay, moving on now. They're testing it here in Halifax. That's right, not Cape Cod. Halifax, Nova Scotia, last October. I've been trying to find out reports on how it worked. You would think by now they would have reports, but I haven't been able to find any. But just the work that they're doing intrigues me. This woman is lowering a device that will measure pH and other aspects of ocean chemistry. And this fellow Mathieu is an oceanographer with an instrument company that he's preparing to make this underwater glider that will track changes in ocean chemistry from a distance. And you can see in the background, again, this brucite being put into the water. So boosting ocean alkalinity to enhance the carbon cycle is basically the idea here of CO2 molecules are shown as little footballs with oxygen on either end and carbon in the middle. And they're maintaining an equilibrium between the atmosphere and the surface waters. By adding magnesium hydroxide, as Doug just pointed out, the hydroxide ions are produced in this. These hydroxide ions react with aqueous CO2, creating bicarbonate ions, which can then float in the ocean for millennia, and but maintain a balance here, and there's room for more CO2 to come back into the oceans. Now, this just came out in Science quite recently. I have the article right here beside me. It's there are various energy inputs, all from, they claim, intermittent solar power. The Earth's oceans naturally concentrate CO2 from the atmosphere, and to extract it, a California startup called Captura will use renewable energy to change the water chemistry. The CO2 can be drawn from the ocean, passed through a filter, and a small amount of it is diverted into a unit that uses electricity to split the water into an acid and a base. And the acid is added to the seawater and dissolved carbon into CO2 gas, and that's pumped and hopefully to a stable place. And then the base or alkaline aspect returned to seawater to neutralize the activity. Now, there are 3 or 4 places here where energy is needed. And if it's only available a few hours a day, it's going to be a problem. It is possible. I was reading this morning that California now is making far more solar based electricity than they can use, and it's actually going into the negative. They can't charge for it anymore because there's more energy coming in with their solar panels all around California than they can use up. So this might be a good place to use it, but still, the excess in California, I think, is mostly between noon and 4 in the afternoon, and still you might get a good 4 hours a day, but it's not 24/7. And they were offered by years ago by Weinberg from Oak Ridge to build a nuclear plant there that would provide water for Los Angeles. And they talked it over with Weinberg for a little while and said, no, thank you. We won't have any nuclear plants out here near Los Angeles. And so that was the end of that story. They also in Iceland, it seems funny, sensible that Iceland would have excess agricultural debris, but apparently there is some, and the carbon in that debris they think could be locked on the seafloor. So they've chopped up the trees here, and they think that it might be better than growing and sinking seaweed. It's hard to imagine, but they think so. It's less likely to rob nutrients from the surrounding water and upset the local ecology. And they may be right there, but they say it will be a small piece of the pie, admit investors, but we need all the tools in the toolbox. So this is a picture of plant waste. It looks like sawdust, putting on these tugboats and taken out to sea and allowed to settle to the bottom. Now, this is the fellow on this webinar that I attended recently, and this is Peter Fikowski, the gentleman who forgot about coming to speak to us on a Jewish holiday last September. But I keep getting notes from him, and I'm on his mailing list. And so that's why I attended this session, and along with about 50 other people who are very interested in his work. The talk this day was Dr. Brian von Herzen, And I was quite impressed with him until he started to talk about one of the biggest falsehood promoters I know of, Amory Lovins. Amory Lovins is a energy advisor to major firms and governments in 70 countries for the last 45 years, author of 31 books and more than 700 papers, strongly anti-nuclear. He thinks we can do everything with solar. And he made the wisecrack to the head speaker, Dr. Brian von Herzen, and Brian admitted to us that his wisecrack was, forget the nuclei, let's just have fun with the electrons. And so that was the remark that led off to an initial negativity on my thoughts. But then as I read further into it, I found that he has collected some pretty bright people, and I think they're doing their best to try permaculture, they call it seaforestation, as part of Climate Foundation. Now, what is marine permaculture? Well, it recreates seaweed forest habitat, and you can see the kelp and various other macrophyte plants growing here on this circular containment. This is a visiting, I think it's solar powered platform, providing some energy and some more solar power here. So they're really serious about it. I'm not sure where the picture was taken, but they use it in some of their promotional things. One of the things that they try and justify working with seaweed, is that it doesn't use very much of the Earth's surface. This red arrow here points to algal beds and reefs, and it's a very tiny percentage of the Earth's surface area compared, of course, to the open ocean or even the continental shelf, or more interesting, tropical rainforest. Quite a minimal amount of area. And yet, when you consider the percentage of the Earth's net primary production of plant material, it becomes quite competitive on a gram per meter squared per year. And so they think that on that basis, seaweed is perhaps more efficient at absorbing CO2 than the Amazon rainforest. There is a problem, though. Too much CO2 in the atmosphere causing the Earth to warm up changes the warm water. It bleaches coral reefs, kills seaweed, and is a problem, particularly with regard to stratification. If you imagine this central cone, and this is Antarctica, and you're projecting in 3 directions across the planet. If you just go from Antarctica deep into the Pacific, you notice that there's decreasing upwelling. Similarly, if you go into the Atlantic, not quite as pronounced, but still, the red is decreasing natural upwelling. There are tiny little traces of increase at some areas, but it's very much dominated by the decreased upwelling. And here is the Indian Ocean here, and you can see it in all 3 oceans, particularly the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And by increasing the stratification of these, by decreasing, I mean, the natural upwelling, you have a problem with utilizing more and more of the ocean for growing seaweeds. They talk about CP ratio, and it's over my head, but it has to do with geochemistry of plants. But these ratios are fairly high, amounts of phosphorus and carbon. And you can see it here for red seaweeds, also for plankton, and for diazotrophs. So it seems to be doing particularly well for red seaweeds. And they talk about a line in the ocean below which the sequestration horizon is about 100 years. If you get it further down, 1,000 meters, it will stay there roughly 1,000 years or more. And the upwelling, therefore, is important because it's provided by, again, renewably powered pumps that are helping these plants do their thing in terms of absorbing CO2 and releasing oxygen. They have another way of looking at it. They say from shutdown to drawdown. And here is again a solar powered supporter. Again, these circular containments of seaweed. They say scaling up the cultivation of kelp can help regenerate our ocean ecosystems and restore marine life from tiny forage fish to apex predators. So that happens more and more offshore now. They can draw down this carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, sink it safely deep down in the ocean for centuries. We don't sink the seaweed, though. We let nature take its course and measure the seaweed that falls off the arrays as having lived out its life and naturally to fall to the bottom. The idea is to regenerate our ocean ecosystems and restore marine life from tiny forage fish to apex predators. So there's an interesting bilateral features that can restore life to the oceans and at the same time draw down significant amounts of carbon. Also, there's a benefit to the locals. The coastal area farmers in the South Pacific rely heavily on the production of seaweed, but the industry is inherently unreliable at the local level. Crop yields are irregular, insurance non-existent, and marine heat waves can wipe out an entire seaweed crop. So marine permaculture has the power to limit the amount of damage, thereby making seaweed-dependent communities more climate change proof and boosting crop yields. So that is very popular with the locals. Also, just reiterate the importance of getting the carbon below 1,000 meters taken out of the atmosphere for up to 1,000 years. And this is a picture of the particle injection pumps that they're using, trying to promote ocean mixing so that they can have the carbon buried for various periods of time, depending upon, the carbon buried for various times, depending upon the depth that it's sent to. They've also, of course, need to have some money. So they find a kelp product called Big Grow. And this is common. This is not discovered by them. It's been known for ages, but they're using it very well in the Philippines. And here they're working with a banana plantation, and it's called Big Grow here. And they have an example of a plot of Chinese cabbage in the Philippine government-run fields. And here on the upper left, there are no additives. Here they've just added the fertilizer, which certainly isn't pretty impressive. Here, just the Big Grow that they extract from this is conventional fertilizer. This is extracted from seaweed, and both together really seem to synergize quite nicely. So they're planning this product, Big Grow, and they're planning to go through various stages. We're getting into stage 2 now, they say, where we can have some transportable seaweed biorefinery and eventually increase it far into next year. So they're quite optimistic. They're mostly going to be mimicking natural upwelling by working in these groups of islands. If you want to see, this is Hawaii up here, and Kiribati, I think Cook Islands are here, so on along the coast here of New Guinea. And so they're thinking about mimicking natural upwelling by enhancing around these islands. They feel that they can lower these plants so that they are not damaged by typhoons. They had one just in December 2021. Over on the right here, you can see the green Philippine Islands. This was a pretty serious damage, but they were able to retrieve and protect their growing baskets by lowering them a bit. So 95% of Australian macrocystic kelp forest is now lost. This is what
Richard, can I ask a question?
sure.
Before we get too far ahead, you mentioned injection pumps. What are these mechanical pumps? And what powers them? But you had
Yes,
mentioned that in one of the slides.
they're solar powered, and
Okay.
that's why I had those pictures of the little floating solar panel.
Yeah. Okay.
So they're powered by that. There's quite a bit um, of power needed, and they don't address it very well. Near the end, in the last paragraph, it says, even if the technology takes off, it will have to scale up massively to make a dent in offsetting global emissions. According to the IPCC, by 2050, engineered carbon removal efforts will need to remove 5 billion tons of CO2 every year to limit the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade. So far, the ocean capture companies are pulling out only thousands of tons, not 5 billion tons. So Matthew Eltsaman, a physicist at Yale, says we have an enormous challenge ahead of us. So they're aware of that, but they feel that to enhance the natural process is going to help. Nobody has mentioned the possibility of floating nuclear barges, such as Russia is doing in the Arctic, but it might at least give 24-hour electricity, and you could put a pretty small reactor on a barge to provide a lot of energy, as is done in the Russian Arctic now. So, but Australia, of course, where these data was taken, Australia will not even allow anything nuclear to come within their territorial waters. They don't want to have anything to do with it. And but they dig uranium and export it all around the world, but they won't. It's still forbidden. So we need to change a little bit their point of view, I think, in Australia. So this is a before-after picture of the kelp forest in Australia. Then there's another method that we've been talking a little bit about called transplantation of harder corals. And this is to enable reef restoration. Laboratory-grown coral plugs can be colonized with algal symbionts that tolerate high temperatures. I went all the way to a lab a couple of years ago and visited a marine biologist who was doing just this sort of work. And I asked him about the pH of his mutants that were thermally tolerant, or trying to find the ones that would be thermally tolerant. And I asked him if he was concerned about ocean acidification. And he kind of looked off into the distance and said, oh, well, that's something that might come up later. We're not thinking about that now. And I thought, that's unfortunate. Here's a guy who's been written up and very aware of the importance of this work, but all he's focused on is temperature tolerance. And I think he needs to, and others need to think beyond that. Florida coral is really in hot water. We've had a number of bleaches down there. I remember taking my open water dive down in Florida. I was very disappointed because the picture down below is more or less what I saw back in the 70s when, no, mid 80s, when my kids were teenagers, and we went diving, and I was just shocked at the appearance of the reefs there. But it recovered, and people said, oh, well, that's okay. It's just a temporary thing. But they can only tolerate so many of these shocking whitening of the bleaching of the coral reefs, and now it seems that they're permanently damaged. Also, the work was planned with an alcorn coral, which is very heat sensitive, so they will try and repeat some of their research with brain coral. But I raised the question, are they measuring the pH? I don't see anything in the records yet about that. And the corals off Australia are really taking a hit. Talk about devastating damage. That's just shocking to see. Now, some upbeat things. You've heard me talk about Sylvia Earle. She's part of that blue economy that we've been talking about. She's looking always for the upbeat side of things. And here she's quite interested in the Sargasso Sea, which covers 2 million square miles of ocean. No land borders. It's defined by the whirling grasp of major currents in the Great Atlantic Gyre, composed of vast mats of sun-soaked, free-floating yellow sargassum bobbing on the surface. She hasn't talked about what could be done with that other than just to appreciate it and to recognize. You can see some interesting little strands of the sargassum weed coming up above the surface, doing some interchange with the air. But nobody is at the moment thinking of, that I'm aware of anything to do with the Sargasso Sea, except take pleasure in knowing that there's this vast place that you should steer away from if you have a propeller-driven boat, so it doesn't get tangled up in the sea. But maybe someday we'll find a way to put it to work for us. Who knows? Then they're also talking about Arctic ice melt, which could drive European heat waves. They say that Arctic melting near Greenland and elsewhere adds 6,000 cubic kilometers of fresh water to the ocean per decade. This sits on top of heavier ocean water that impedes mixing of the layers. The surface gets colder during the fall and winter, leading to the cold blob shown here. So this could lead to more intense cold blobs and stormier winters and hotter summers in near Greenland and possibly over to Northern Europe. I think it's time to get serious about whales. Baleen whales play a critical role in marine ecosystems. 50 million years ago, there were arytenoids. I mentioned this before, more details. They evolved into long cylinders that fused at the base to form a huge rigid structure in the larynx. So when whales push large amounts of air through this rigid structure and against a large fatty cushion, they make low frequency sounds that have become crucial for their unique communication. Danish and Scottish researchers recently modeled these sounds, which unfortunately overlap with the sounds of human shipping. So we need to find a way to coexist better, I think, with whales, because it's unfortunate that so many of them are killed by human ships passing. We also keep having oil spills. Fortunately, they're not on the coast of Louisiana yet. After that terrible spill that we had 14 years ago. But on February the 7th of this year, an oil-like substance, they don't even call it oil yet, began leaking from an overturned barge. It was clearly abandoned, stuck in a reef south of Cove Tobago. It leaked for almost a month since the accident, and now it is contained by authorities in Trinidad and Tobago, but it's still causing an environmental disaster through the southern Caribbean. The towing tug has disappeared. Nobody knows who's responsible for it. And they've only contained it. I put the word contained in quotes because they pumped in enough seawater to keep it from leaking any further for now from this tug. Nothing like the leak in 13 years ago in the Caribbean up further north, but still they happen too often. So that barge shouldn't have been towed in a precarious way by a tug. We've just got to recognize that oil and seawaters don't mix well, fortunately. They don't disperse unless they put on dispersants, which sometimes are horrible too. But we need to really protect the oceans better than we're doing. Just to comment a little bit more on deep sea mining, a couple of little photographs, one of a glass sponge and the other of what's called a unicumber. I'd never heard of those before. But fascinating little creatures that I think we should make every effort to maintain, preserve, and avoid deep sea mining. Of course, a talk about the oceans is not complete without solving the plastic pollution problem. They published this article recently, an executive summary, which I didn't attempt to read. I got pretty bogged down in the chemistry of it. So I just put in this little bit of a slide indicating that our policies and regulatory framework need to focus on how to reuse what can be reused, how to recycle where you just possibly can, and reorient and diversify what gets made. So the manufacturing, I think, has to be deeply involved in it, because otherwise we're just picking up the beaches forever and not catching up. Speaking of picking up the beaches, this picture is from Thailand. Only 9% of plastics are recycled globally. And the polymer degradation and mixed waste streams really limit the number of reuse cycles that you can do. Sometimes you can only do 2 or 3. And so they've come up with this new idea chemically called thermosets. These are plastics that maintain their shape upon curing and are not recycled at all. And of course, these have been around for a long time. We just never think of them. But we see these things at picnic baskets. Sometimes when I was a virologist, my viruses used to come in these things with dry ice in them. And they've been used and they're reused a few times before they end up in the trash. But what was just discovered fairly recently was that thermosets, they're a special kind of plastic made from polymer chains that are cross-linked. And because of their thermal stability, they're widely used in adhesives, coatings, silicones, foams, furniture packaging. Almost a fifth of our polymers are made with these thermosets. And although very useful, their cross-linked nature, set during the curing of it, makes them nearly impossible to recycle. In contrast with what we're familiar with on a daily basis, the thermoplastics, they're not amenable to melt. So the thermosets are not amenable to melt processing the way thermoplastics are. And so Wu et al. Used a chemoselective strategy recently published that allows thermosets to, these are the difficult ones to break down. They can completely depolymerize after soaking in methanol at 70 degrees centigrade for a week. And so I thought this was a new approach. We need to be constantly finding ways to improve our recycling as well as limit the manufacture. Just a couple of prize winners every now and again. Various nature organizations, including Ocean Conservancy, offer prizes, and I couldn't resist showing you these pictures of a Atolla jelly spin, it's called, and this is a zoea crab larva, and rising in the current, just to see the beauty in the photography. Copepods in a drop on the left. I remember the first time somebody showed me a copepod with a microscope. It just, I think, almost changed my whole approach to nature when I first saw those little fellows swimming around in a drop of water. For those of you who get National Geographic, this was not taken from there. That's called the strawberry squid. But the current issue of National Geographic is amazing. The first quarter of it is just loaded with amazing photographs of cephalopods, mostly octopi, and apparently it's going to be shown on TV, I think starting later today. I think on the Disney Channel and perhaps other channels. So if you feel like looking more at at octopi, you would be just amazed at the images there. My final image is of a paper nautilus. This is in the Philippines, and it's called a paper nautilus, I think, because it's so thin. It looks like almost translucent paper. With it, you can see the little siphon here and little eye there, but it's an adorable little thing, and it's resting on a little piece of a branch of fiber, and these little dots here are floating debris after volcanic disruption on them in the Philippines, causing these fine bits of dust. Hey, maybe there's some water in there, and water bubbles too. Also, algae we're finding interesting evolutionary variants. This one is called pantothene. It's an intermediate in the catabolism of coenzyme A by the body. And since it's a part of that and a common cofactor, it's thought to have been present in the prebiotic soup in the oceans before various plants came onto land. So a synthesis mechanism has also been suggested. You might read more and hear more about pantothene as part of our evolutionary past. We've all talked about, been interested in artificial intelligence. They think it could be used for identifying whale sharks. And so you see a picture here of this one located near Madagascar by the name of Welma. And it's a female. Positive potential utilities of artificial intelligence are still being dreamed up the more we look for them. And you can see in the blow up here, these different colored little pigmentations, and AI might be used to help identify different ones in the future. Just a couple of notes from Dr. Amanda Vincent. I've talked about her before. She's at the University of British Columbia, and she runs an eye seahorse program. She's really making progress. I think she's smart by involving scientists from the public. Instead of calling them amateur scientists, she calls them citizen scientists, which I think is a nicer term. And you see here a pregnant female, and 7,000 sightings from citizen scientists have really helped her research a great deal, she says. Also, they're planning a national marine sanctuary. Some good news on this day. 500,000 square miles are planned northwest of Hawaii near Midway. It would include coral islands and deep regions and will require an act of Congress to confirm, but hopes remain high that that will happen, especially after some recent successes in Congress. I can't end this without a little atomic treat here. This is the nuclear ship Savannah, and the NRC, that's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is going to hold a public meeting on board on May the 8th. So my question to you is, anybody want to put their hand up or tell me, where do you suppose this public meeting is? Where do you think this nuclear ship Savannah is at the moment? Any suggestions, ideas?
South China Sea.
I beg your pardon?
No, Savannah, Georgia. Not
No.
Savannah, Georgia.
No, it's
Well,
not.
to be, but it's going to be moved there from somewhere else. I mean, I just know we have a lot of ships in the South China Sea right now.
Yeah, no, it's already there because May the 8th is coming up pretty soon. So it's there now, but they're going to have a public meeting on board. I thought Steve Shellen might know. Do you know, Stephen?
No, I do not.
Okay. Anybody want to make another guess as to where it is located? This ship, by the way, was built at the orders of President Eisenhower. It was built in 1959. It sailed around the Earth several times and had lots of fuel left on board when it was retired in 1970 or 71 after about 11 years. As I say, Australia wouldn't let it in its waters, nor would New Zealand. But it did go around. It's a combined passenger and freight ship. They tried to combine the two, which is probably, in retrospect, not a very good idea. It certainly looks different from the one that hit the bridge. Now I'm going to give it away. It's in Baltimore, and it looks a lot different from the big freighter that hit the bridge and knocked over that famous bridge in Baltimore. But I understand that that bridge is getting removed, and 11% of the traffic in Baltimore is now coming through. But this is already there, and if you're really interested and you want to hear what they're going to do with it, you can go to Baltimore, and it's a public meeting, so you can go and attend. I will be happy to read about it. But it is a beautiful ship, and I hope they do make it public. I hope they make it better than in understanding and the public appreciation. This morning I got some kind of a Earth Day probe where they wanted me to invest in something that the military was making, which looked like a flying saucer or some kind of a flying cricket. And they claim that I should look into various military companies to make more money with my retired money. And in so doing, they thought they would turn me on by showing a picture of an atomic bomb exploding over what looked like Los Angeles. It might have been some other city, but it horrified me so much that I immediately shut it off, of course, because I've been criticized already by a member of this group for promoting what I'm going to promote in the next slide, and that is our summer reading. He has criticized this book because he says that they cherry pick, and he's right. They cherry pick. And Mike Conley is the main author. He's not a scientist. He has Stephen Boyd, a PhD, review it, and Eric Meyer, founder of Generation Atomic. But I admit that they do cherry pick. But, you know, when I think of all the negative cherry picking that's been done for 70 years against nuclear power, I'm prepared to accept a little positive cherry picking. And so I recommend this book to all of you for your summer reading assignment. It's big enough, 22 chapters. Each chapter is not terribly long. So I thought we would cover the first 11 chapters by September the 25th, and then the next 11 chapters by November the 4th. Could read them all anytime. The book could cost $25 to $26 on Amazon, soft covered. I have a copy of it here if you want me to show you any more details. But I think that it would, to my mind, it emphasizes the biggest problems that nuclear energy has today. And one is fear, and the other is recycling. And I think it
I thought
focuses
ignorance would be second.
Pardon?
I thought ignorance would be second.
Well, fear and ignorance are kind of wrapped together. In fact, that's what Marie Curie said. She said, once you understand something, you will no longer be afraid of it. I've got a T-shirt to Marie Curie, and that's written on the back of it. So yeah, ignorance and fear are closely linked, Stephen. Good point. Well, it's 11:15. We've got some time. I kind of breezed through this and had some good questions and comments as we went through. Thank you, Doug, and others.
I have a point I'd like to make, Steve,
sure.
or Stephen, Richard. Yeah, Argonne, before I retired, had developed this relates to oil spills, surface oil on the ocean. And a few scientists, and they took us in their lab, they developed a sponge that was unbelievable. It could pick up oil, and then you could wring it out, and it could be scalable. They were showing, but I never heard that it was ever picked up by anybody. But this material was crazy, and we were trying to do some learning labs with kids with it. a little bit, and it was just remarkable. But I never heard what happened to the patent, to the intellectual capital, and who might have picked. You think the oil companies would have picked it up, but
Maybe they
it was
bought
a
it. And then,
remarkable material.
yeah, maybe they bought it and then suppressed it. But one would think not. I encourage you, Lou, to go back to your alma mater, if I may call it that, and
Yeah.
see if you can come up with what happened. See, they say things are scalable, but it's one thing to be scalable. It's another to find somebody who are willing to put up the money. And this is what's of course happened to the whole nuclear industry. We've had nuclear is eminently scalable, but because of the upfront costs, and when you look at the world today and the reluctance to build anything nuclear, they say, well, the upfront costs are high. Well, sure. We've seen companies fail, like Toshiba, for example, in South Carolina, I think, because of the summer project there that failed. But so it has to be more than just scalable. You have to have a consortium of industry, government working together to really pull us off.
Well, there was a chemical process that was fairly unique and involved, and maybe that process affected the scalability. I'm
Yes.
not sure, but
Yeah.
it looked, they were showing larger versions of it, and it's just a remarkable product that just could sop up oil, like wring it out, and then it would sop it up all over again. I mean, it just kept going. But I don't, maybe there was a lifespan issue with it too after a while. I'm not sure. But
Yeah.
the other limitation was oil beneath the surface. That gets a little dicey to kind of deal with. It probably could have, but some of that big spill in the Caribbean, that went down, that started going down below the surface, didn't it? I think, and it didn't all stay up. It went
The one in
downward.
February the 7th, a month ago.
No, I'm talking the one under Obama, when Obama.
Oh yeah, 2010.
was-
Yeah.
Yeah,
I gave a review of that perhaps before you joined us. I gave a 5-year review of it to this group, and the answer to the question is yes and no. Some things have reversed very nicely, some things haven't, and if I can remember a little bit of what I said 5 years ago, there are some long-standing effects, and so we can say nature is a wonderful healer, but there are only certain things that heal up.
Yep.
Equally within 5 years, there are some late effects. Yeah.
One other comment to make up, you talked quite a bit about mitigation of CO2 but the one thing we have to realize with oceans is they have a heat capacity. And I think a lot of the heat has gone downward in the ocean, which has kind of saved some of the surface heat and the surface weather conditions a bit. But there's limits to that. And I don't know what anybody knows about that, but the chemical part is very important. But I think we've kind of hit the wall with oceans absorbing heat deep and deeper depths. I think it's kind of, from what I've heard, in bits and pieces.
I hadn't heard that, so thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that question up. I heard about the problems of lack of light, and so it being a bit of a desert. But I hadn't heard that heat accumulated there. I suppose you could say that, considering the depth of the ocean and the proximity of the mantle, that there might be some heat generated from the center of the planet in the absence of mixing that could have contributed. I can't imagine what else would make it warm down there.
Well, there's currents that carry major tractor currents that carry heat things downward
Well, they would have to
and
come back
in the
up.
oceans.
They can't.
But they cool.
you can't just take it down. As soon as you got circulation down, you're gonna have to have circulation coming back up.
Yeah, but it's still, okay, but it's still taking heat downward
Yeah.
for a while. It's like I said, it's limited. It's not gonna keep doing that forever. I mean,
No.
it's got a
What's the-
limitation.
What's the driving force? Normally, the sinking waters are because they are cooled.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but these
Hot water
these-
floats.
That's true, Stephen, but these currents, I'm certain NOAA, would somebody could find answers to this from NOAA, that, the heat has been absorbed downward somewhat. And how far down, I don't know.
Even the Earth's
Actually,
Coriolis
Lou is correct.
depends on heat difference.
At least 90% of the heat from CO2 actually gets absorbed into the water.
Yes.
And in fact, if you look at the data of how much heat is absorbed in the water, you can get an estimate of what the energy imbalance is in the top of the atmosphere, which is on the order of 1 watt per meter squared. So, I would disagree that it's not quite going to be, it's not something that's in danger right now. I think for quite a long time, we're going to keep seeing most of the heat go to the deep ocean. The circulation time is on the order of 1,000 years. So doesn't come back immediately to the surface again. And let me bring up another point about one of your slides, which I didn't quite understand, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And thank you so much for this really great talk. But you made a comment, so it's actually related to this topic. You made a comment, I think, that in a decrease of the overturning circulation would make Europe warmer. Is that what you said? Maybe we can back
No,
this
I
line.
think what I said was that to be poorer circulation near Greenland and Iceland, and some of that might get up into Northern Europe, into Norway. And I thought, as I recall, what they were saying is that this was an ice accumulation, and that it might make winters colder.
Right. I
but-
don't think your slides say that. So
I think so.
the crux of the matter is that fresh water is coming off of Greenland, and that fresh water inhibits what's called the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation.
Right. Yeah.
And which brings heat up from the equator to the north.
Right.
And so, for example, 10,000 years ago, there was a period where there was a slowdown in this overturning circulation, and you had what's called the Younger Dryas period. And during this period, there was when we were coming out of the ice ages, there was a sudden reversion back into the ice age again, because of the slowdown of this overturning circulation. And actually, what's sort of alarming is that recently there's a lot of really nice, interesting data that's coming out, which shows that there is a considerable slowdown of this overturning circulation right now. So the question, of course, is going to be over what time period is there going to be slowdown in this overturning circulation that might, in fact, make Europe much colder than this. So I think what I was confused about is I thought in your slide it said that it would make Europe warmer. But maybe I was incorrect.
It might have crept in, as somebody said, in the summer, but I emphasized and believe much more with you that it's good. It would make the winters colder. So I would focus on that. Dorothy, you have your hand up.
Well, let me just, I wanted to say something else, but let me reply to this. I thought that the slide that you showed showed these strange ice blobs, and I thought what you were saying pertains specifically to the effect of the blobs in having a localized change as opposed to just the currents themselves. Isn't that what you were showing?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, what I wanted to ask was a more general question in terms of, you showed us a lot of different technologies, and I was wondering how scalable these things are. Are these mostly just pilot projects here and there? How likely are they to make any big difference anytime soon?
Very, very good question. Yeah, I would talk about them as pilot projects. I introduced them before I got to them, to the rest of them, with this problem in the Queen Charlotte Islands. Uh, uh, what I would think would be, for a localized study to look at iron and see if it affects the salmon population would have been interesting. And as I tried to get update information on that, one direction took me that they'd never done it, that World Wildlife claimed that they had canceled it, and another one said no, they did it, but they didn't find much difference. But I think it would be interesting to know more information with carefully designed protocols on make sure that it doesn't harm. But a localized injection of iron, I can't imagine, is going to have much high concern. And as long as it doesn't lower the population of salmon. So the only information we have from that study so far is that it had no effect that they could discern. Again, doesn't necessarily mean it had no effect at all.
Sure. Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
So I guess I read about this this iron fertilization proposal, and I actually spoke with another friend of mine about this, and then I did a little bit of, not a lot, but a little bit of research, and there actually have been quite a few investigations of this, I guess, and in particular, this idea was proposed by this guy that you had invited to speak with us, I guess.
Oh yeah, that's right. He did. Yeah.
He's really big on this. Well, turns out that actually I believe there was a study done at MIT that investigated the likely consequence of doing this. And this guy had actually recommended doing this in a particularly fertile, maybe even infertile area down in the southern Atlantic, I think, because it was the most amenable spot to actually inject the iron. And at least the conclusions of this MIT study were that this would have essentially no net effect on the Earth's CO2 concentration, because whatever benefits occurred down there would be offset by the circulation of this throughout the really around the Earth's water circulation pattern. And that first of all, they wouldn't expect, at least based on the study that was done, they wouldn't expect much of a change, if anything. And in addition to that, it could actually damage fisheries, as you're pointing out. There was a significant potential of that, and so that and there have been actually there's certainly been small scale or smaller scale experiments with this technology, to demonstrate that the chemistry works.
Yeah, thank you for that, Doug. I did a little bit of reading, not as much as you, on that subject, and came to similar conclusions. One of the things, perhaps, that this group that I mainly focused on were more successful and didn't get so much public concern is that they were not injecting anything. They were stimulating the growth of kelp and other algae, and in that way, just helping out with the circulation, improving oceanic circulation. They were just trying to help out what the Earth was doing for us already, or the oceans were doing. And that way, you're not injecting a foreign substance. I tried hard to find out what happened up in Halifax, and I never got any background there. That's a little different. There, you're just putting in the alkaline brucite, but that I'd like to know a little bit more about. But I agree with you that the iron is a scary topic, particularly if it has negative effects that we're not aware of yet. And by injecting something quite foreign like iron as opposed to magnesium hydroxide, or better yet, just stimulating growth of algae is a much less dangerous thing. You're helping out nature, and that's why they call it climate restoration.
The other thing I was gonna to toss into the mix here. So you were talking about this magnesium hydroxide injection into the ocean.
Yeah.
You know that I gave a talk to this group some time ago about concrete.
Yes.
And one of the outgrowths of that was that I was introduced to a couple of guys on campus who are working on this problem. And actually the problem is actually very, the injection of magnesium hydroxide is very similar to the concrete problem in a sense, because it turns out that if, magnesium is a +2 ion.
Yep.
Likewise, so is calcium. And calcium is one of the essential ingredients in particular in Portland cement, but in concrete in general. And if you contact calcium with CO2, it turns out you'll end up with calcium carbonate.
Yeah.
And calcium carbonate, also known as calcite, will precipitate out,
Yeah.
and you can sequester it essentially forever.
Yeah.
In fact, it's essentially the same, the thing you start with limestone. That's what limestone is. Limestone is calcium carbonate. You
Right.
heat it up and you form calcium oxide, which is essentially what goes into Portland cement.
Yeah.
And so it turns out that, and this was one of the outgrowths of this investigation I did into concrete. It turns out that fly ash has a lot of calcium in it. And essentially any byproduct, any industrial byproduct that contains large amounts of calcium can be used to absorb CO2. And it also turns out that even today, we actually include in concrete a lot of fly ash. But we could actually include more, and not only could we include more, we could also carbonate it before we put it into the concrete, and in doing that, sequester all of that CO2 in our roads and our sidewalks and whatever else has concrete.
That's a great idea. What about when you say fly ash, you're defining a product that it would be nice if you would define it more. Are you referring to purely the end products of coal plants?
Exactly. So turns out, many of you may know that, hey, we've been burning coal to produce electricity for really a century and a half now, if
right.
longer. And fly ash has been accumulating not only in this country, but around the world for 100, 150 years, right?
Yeah.
And it actually sits in ponds. I know when I first started working, coming out of college, back behind the buildings where I work was a huge fly ash pond. And we played softball on top of it. Well, it turns out now, some of these, in particular, those that were not lined, are leaching heavy metals into the water table and down into our water supply. And this has become an issue. And many of these things have to be remediated. All of them could be excavated. There's just a lot of this stuff available around the world, and it could all be used to not only decrease the amount of Portland cement that we use, but also absorb CO2. And on top of that, it's cheaper than Portland cement. So economically, it makes all the sense in the world. And it's actually something that I'm actually working on significantly right now. So I just wanted to mention that.
Can
Well,
can
thank
I
you.
say
Can I
one
ask a
comment?
question?
Sure.
Doug, can I ask a question about all the toxic components in the fly ash? Isn't that sort of a fly in the ointment there?
Oh, no, it actually isn't
That's what I was gonna
if
say
you,
too. You got too many
because if you,
toxins from coal burning, a lot of toxins.
so if you encapsulate it in concrete, it isn't going anywhere. And that's
Okay.
the whole point of it. Okay.
Well,
And it-
there's one issue though, if I can quickly interject. It's like a biofuels issue. It's just how do you move that vast amount of material around? I
You're
guess
moving it anyway.
you can
You're
put
moving it
concrete,
anyway.
wait. You can put concrete plants anywhere you want, but you're still limiting where they're going to be and how.
No,
and
you're
where
not.
the
Actually,
If I,
Lou,
if I can interrupt a second,
sure.
having worked at a large electric utility for a long time, fly ash was not a problem. Fly ash was eagerly sought by all of the concrete purveyors, and you'll find it's in most of the I-94 concrete that's been put in since the 60s in
Correct.
Wisconsin.
It could be consumed to even a greater extent, Stephen. And
Yes.
and it turns out that in addition to being consumed, and it is consumed, in fact, it's specified in many concrete mixes now because it enhances certain properties of the concrete. It makes it stronger in many cases. However, we're not using as much of it as we could otherwise, and we're not carbonating it like we could otherwise. And there is still enormous quantities of this laying around all over, in the state of Wisconsin, there are probably 5, 6, 7 of them. And around the country, there are enormous quantities, in particular in the Southeast. You know, you may have read a number of years ago about the dam that broke loose and
Tennessee,
flowed through that old fly ash accumulation. Created an enormous problem there.
You still have a movement issue with it to move.
You don't necessarily, because we move limestone right now, Lou. Limestone. If we were to move as much of this as we move limestone, you wouldn't have any change at all. So actually moving this is no different than moving the limestone that we move around right now. Literally not different at all. So,
Doug, how would this relate to oceans? Can you carbonate it and throw it in the ocean, or
I wouldn't. The idea behind this is actually to pull CO2 directly from the atmosphere. Okay. And do it in a very actually energy efficient way, in the sense that all you're doing is blowing ambient air through a bed of fly ash, and it will absorb CO2 from the air.
That sounds like a whole nother talk. I don't know.
Actually, it's what I present. I mean, you wouldn't remember it. I can't expect anybody to remember it, but it's actually what they're working on campus right now.
Okay. All right.
Great. Well, thank you for that interesting conversation. Maybe we can have a presentation again, Doug, as you get further into it. And speaking of which, I'm open to some suggestions for this fall. We don't have to go, for a full 10 sessions if we don't come up with that, but we do have a few scheduled so far. I thought for a field trip that we might try revisiting Montfort wind farm, which is about an hour's drive due west of Middleton on Highway 14, I think. Anyway, or maybe 151. In any case, it's about an hour's drive. So I called them up, and at first they said yes, and then they thought about it some more, and then they said no, they didn't want to do that anymore. And so then I called Epic, because they have 6 wind turbines that are closer to us, even though it would have been nice to have seen the one that we all looked at back in 2012 or so. It would be greater distance, and it might be a better designed facility. I'm not sure. So I contacted Epic, and at first they were enthused. Then they said, well, what we would do is prepare a talk for you, and we would combine geothermal, wind, and solar at Epic. And that sounded fine. I thought we would probably go for that. And then they changed their mind and said, no, I can't do that after all. So now we're working on the possibility that they will send me some notes on the 6 turbines that are there now. They're on the Highway 12, a very short part of the distance to Sauk City, maybe a quarter of the distance. It's about 15 miles, maybe, or 10 miles, not even that, less than 10 miles north. And so they might send me some written materials, and we could drive up in 2 or 3 cars and get out in early October and just chat around the base of one of these wind turbines. One of the nice things about visiting them is that you get a feel for the pulsation, the proximity of the blades as they sweep by, the shadowing effect. So it's one thing to hear about it, it's another thing to see it. When we went to the one in Montfort about 10 plus years ago, I was amazed to look at a section through them, and those blades are made they're made like a pretty sophisticated airplane. They're very, very durable fiberglass shell with some ribs placed along the way to give them extra strength, and extraordinarily durable. And yet they apparently need to be changed about every 20 years or so. And it would be very interesting to see what they say at Epic. So I'm hoping that we can work something out with them so that we can make a car trip. It's a fairly short distance away. And,
I'll make a quick suggestion,
yeah,
Richard.
sure.
I listened to a symposium or a presentation at the Energy Institute just this past year on the geothermal installation at Epic. It's being, I guess, researched is probably a good way of describing it, by a guy in the civil engineering department at UW. And he's been collecting information on it because there are several different I would say geothermal sites around the Epic site. And he's collecting data, trying to model all of this so that it can be, so that the resulting information can help to design future geothermal installations. And you may know that Epic's geothermal installation is, I believe it's the largest geothermal installation in the world. And it's used primarily not for heating, but for cooling these buildings.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I gave a talk, as you might recall, on geothermal about a year and a half ago, and focused mostly, excuse me, on the facility out in near Santa Rosa, which is has quite an interesting history. But I discussed all the geothermal plants around the world, from Italy to Japan, and in the Rift Valley of Africa. It's an interesting source of energy, but I focused mostly on electricity, not on cooling and heating. So, but that sounds interesting. I might pursue. Thanks for your comments. I might pursue that way that we could learn more from Epic. I'm still negotiating and communicating with the Epic people who deal with the public. So,
Actually, maybe even do it through this professor on campus, because he has a very good relationship with the people at Epic.
do you remember his name offhand?
I'm gonna find him here in a minute, and
Okay, thank you. You can email it to me.
Yep.
Like, so if I don't, if I can be armed with that when the tourist person calls me back from Epic, probably later today or tomorrow. So, but anyway, I hope that you all have a good rest of the Earth Day, and appreciate your input on all these fronts. And I look forward to interacting with you through the summer. If you have any questions on the reading assignment, or if you have any thoughts about bringing in some outside speakers or yourself presenting, we don't have to have lectures. We can have just discussion groups, which we've done in the past. And I see you smiling away there, Matt Mert. So I'm glad that you all enjoyed today, and we'll look forward to more in the fall. Have a very nice summer in the meantime.
Yeah. Use,
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah,
Thanks for another
thanks,
great
Richard.
semester. We
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Good,
Great job.
good series this spring. Good job.
yeah.
Thank
Give him a
you.
hand.
Okay.
I appreciate
you.
I appreciate your acknowledgement. Okay. Have a lovely summer all.
Yeah.
You too.
Adios.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye, Jim. Hey, Jim, are you going to stay on for a minute? You can unmute. You're the last guy there. Can you unmute? Hello, Jim. Are you there? I can see you. Your name, I guess yeah. But you're muted according to my thing. And even if you don't have a camera on your computer, we could chit chat for a minute or two. Doesn't seem to be working. So we can always email Jim. Glad that you could join us. I appreciate that. And hope you're keeping well. And we'll stay in touch on email. So long.